The signs were there from the start, scattered like breadcrumbs I had been too blind to follow. My marriage to Rachel had always looked perfect from the outside. A picturesque home on the edge of Austin, Texas, matching coffee mugs, and weekend barbecues with friends who envied our dynamic. But behind the facade was a slow, creeping shift that I refused to acknowledge until it was too late. Rachel's career as a corporate events planner demanded late nights and endless networking. I had always admired her ability to juggle demanding clients with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony. But over time, those long hours and frequent trips began to feel more like walls than bridges between us. The cracks started small. A late return home with an uncharacteristically vague excuse. The way her phone never left her side. Its screen flashing with notifications she swiped away before I could glance at them. At first, I dismissed these moments, convincing myself that the strain of her work was to blame. But trust, I would come to learn, is most dangerous when it is blind. It was a quiet Sunday morning when the first real seed of doubt was planted. Rachel was in the shower, and her phone buzzed repeatedly on the counter. My gaze lingered on the screen longer than I cared to admit, the flashing name, A. Blake, drawing my attention. The messages were brief, casual exchanges peppered with humor, until one froze me in place. "Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again." My heart thudded in my chest as I stared at the words. The shower turned off in the distance, and the sound jolted me back to reality. I placed the phone down quickly, my hands trembling as I pretended to focus on the morning paper. When Rachel appeared, her hair wrapped in a towel, she smiled and kissed me on the cheek as if nothing had changed. I convinced myself it was innocent. Some inside joke I didn't understand or a misunderstanding I hadn't pieced together. But deep down, a gnawing feeling began to take root, and no amount of rationalization could silence it. Over the next few weeks, Rachel's behavior shifted. Her laughter, once so genuine and infectious, felt rehearsed, like a script she was performing for an audience of one. She started working later, leaving earlier, and her explanations for her absences felt like the practiced lines of someone hiding behind a curtain. At night, the space between us in bed grew wider, an unspoken distance neither of us acknowledged. I began to notice how her phone was always turned face down, how her responses to my questions became curt, as though she were eager to change the subject. The more I observed, the more I questioned. The turning point came when I found the receipt. It was crumpled in the pocket of a blazer she rarely wore, a receipt from a boutique hotel downtown. The date was from 3 weeks earlier, a night she had claimed to be out with clients. The room had been booked under A. Blake. My mind raced. This wasn't a coincidence. The name matched the messages I had seen, and the implications were undeniable. Still, I clung to hope. Perhaps it was a misunderstanding, a booking made by her company or a clerical error. But the doubts had grown too large to ignore. Unable to silence the unease, I began keeping track of her schedule. I cross-referenced her travel dates with the details on her receipts. Patterns emerged, each one confirming my fears. Every time she had traveled for work, there were charges linked to A. Blake. One night, Rachel claimed she was attending a networking event. I followed her. It felt wrong, like a betrayal of the trust we had once shared. But the truth demanded to be uncovered. I parked a block away from the restaurant she had named, only to see her car pull into the lot of the same boutique hotel. I waited, my hands gripping the steering wheel, the hum of the engine vibrating beneath me. Hours later, she emerged. She wasn't alone. A man walked beside her, tall, sharply dressed, and exuding a confidence that stung more than I cared to admit. They laughed, their silhouettes illuminated by the neon glow of the hotel's sign. When he touched her arm, I felt a surge of anger and heartbreak, watching helplessly as the image of my marriage shattered before my eyes. That night, I lay awake, consumed by a storm of emotions. Anger, sadness, betrayal. The evidence was undeniable, but the thought of confronting Rachel terrified me. What if she denied it? What if she confirmed it? Either way, the truth would destroy the life we had built. In the days that followed, I became a silent observer in my own home, watching Rachel with a new lens. Her smile felt hollow, her actions too deliberate. I wondered if she could sense my growing distance or if she was too consumed by her double life to notice. Each piece of evidence I collected added to the weight pressing down on me. A weight I carried alone, unable to share my suspicions with anyone. The receipts, the messages, the late nights, they were fragments of a story I wished I didn't have to read. I knew I couldn't stay in the shadows forever. Confronting Rachel felt like stepping off a ledge, the ground uncertain beneath me. But the truth, no matter how painful, was the only path forward. As I stared at the growing pile of evidence, I felt a surge of determination. Rachel had chosen her secrets, but I refused to let them define my future. Whatever lay ahead, I was ready to face it. The surface of our marriage had cracked, revealing a truth I couldn't ignore. And as I stood at the edge of this revelation, I knew there was no turning back. The day I resolved to confront Rachel, I felt the weight of inevitability pressing down on me. Our life together had been a mosaic of shared moments. Weekend trips, dinner parties, plans for a future I now questioned. The puzzle pieces I'd uncovered, hotel receipts, cryptic messages, and subtle lies, had formed a picture I could no longer ignore. I waited for her return from yet another client meeting, the clock creeping past 11. When she walked through the door, her demeanor was effortless, even cheerful. She kissed me on the cheek, set her bag on the counter, and hummed softly as she poured herself a glass of wine. Watching her move through the kitchen so casually, so naturally, felt maddening. Instead of confronting her, I stayed silent, letting my suspicions fester. I told myself I needed more clarity, more proof, but deep down, I was afraid. Afraid of what her answers might mean for the life we had built. In the days that followed, I became an invisible observer of Rachel's life. Every word she spoke, every glance she gave, and every excuse she offered became data points in the growing dossier I had constructed in my mind. I began cross-referencing her alibis against GPS data from her phone, a feature she didn't realize was synced to my account. The results were damning. She wasn't simply meeting a Blake occasionally. It was frequent, deliberate, and meticulously hidden. Once I followed her. She left the house dressed impeccably, her heels clicking against the pavement as she made her way to the car. I trailed her through Austin's winding streets, keeping a safe distance. When she pulled into the parking lot of a boutique hotel, my breath caught in my throat. I parked a block away and waited. Minutes turned into hours, each one feeding the storm of anxiety and anger swirling inside me. When she finally emerged, Blake was with her. He was younger than I had expected, with sharp features and a self-assured presence that made me bristle. They exchanged a long look before parting ways. It was all the confirmation I needed, yet it only deepened the pit in my stomach. Desperation drove me to confide in my best friend, Liam, whose no-nonsense approach to life often felt abrasive but grounded. When I told him everything, he listened without judgment. Then, in his typical blunt fashion, he offered to help. Liam had a knack for digging into digital trails, and he quickly uncovered details I could have never found on my own. He discovered an alternate email account Rachel had been using, one tied to her work but never mentioned at home. The emails were a treasure trove of damning evidence, filled with exchanges between her and Blake. But their correspondence wasn't just personal. It referenced shared financial dealings, hidden bank accounts, and a string of payments that didn't add up. Liam's discovery painted a picture far worse than I had anticipated. Rachel and Blake weren't just entangled in an affair. They were partners in something far more complex. The idea that Rachel was leading a double life solidified with every piece of evidence I uncovered. Her calendar, once a reflection of professional ambition, now felt like a tapestry of lies. Her meetings, her trips, her late nights, they were all threads in a web of deception. While she was at work one afternoon, I searched her office at home. There, among files and notebooks, I found receipts for extravagant dinners, tickets for events she had never mentioned, and a keycard to a storage unit downtown. The keycard felt like Pandora's box. I knew that whatever it opened would likely contain answers I wasn't ready for. But the need for clarity outweighed the fear of what I might find. The storage facility was an unassuming row of metal doors beneath flickering fluorescent lights. Rachel's unit was near the back. Sliding the keycard through the reader, I hesitated before pulling open the door. Inside was a life compartmentalized. Boxes and folders were stacked neatly, their labels hinting at a world I had never known existed. Photos of Rachel and Blake were scattered throughout, laughing at dinners, posing on vacations, capturing moments of intimacy that felt like daggers to my chest. There were files detailing financial transactions tied to her firm and others that had no clear connection to her work. Some involved offshore accounts, while others hinted at larger, more secretive dealings. Then there were the gifts, jewelry, designer clothes, handwritten notes that oozed with affection. The notes were the hardest to read. They spoke of a future, of dreams shared between two people who seemed to believe they had found something real. The betrayal wasn't just physical. It was emotional, and it cut deeper than I could have imagined. Armed with irrefutable evidence, I felt both vindicated and broken. The woman I had built a life with had created an entirely separate existence, one that had no room for me. That night, I spread the photos, receipts, and documents across the kitchen table. When Rachel walked in, her expression shifted immediately. She saw everything laid out before her, the color draining from her face. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt like a chasm, filled with everything we both knew but couldn't yet say. Let me know when you're ready for part 3, where the confrontation leads to shocking revelations and the stakes grow higher. That night, the kitchen table became a battleground. The evidence lay spread before me like the pieces of a shattered mirror. Photos, receipts, and the damning notes I had discovered in the storage unit. Rachel froze in the doorway, her eyes scanning the table. For a moment, her expression was unreadable, a blank canvas hiding the storm underneath. I waited, my pulse hammering in my ears. This was the moment I had dreaded and anticipated in equal measure. The truth was unavoidable now, laid bare between us. Yet, I was unprepared for what came next. Rachel walked to the table, her movements deliberate, and sat across from me. Her hands trembled as she reached for one of the photos, her fingers brushing the edges like it might burn her. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, trembling with emotion. She didn't deny the affair. Instead, she unraveled everything, piece by piece, her words carving deep into the fragile remains of my trust. She confessed to meeting Aiden Blake, Aiden, she called him, at a corporate retreat over a year ago. Their connection had been immediate, an electric spark she hadn't felt in years. What began as harmless banter quickly escalated to late-night meetings, clandestine getaways, and eventually a full-blown affair. Her voice broke as she described how it felt to be seen, to feel alive again after what she called the monotony of our life together. Aiden had reignited something in her, she said, but every word, every justification, felt like a dagger. Her confession didn't stop at the emotional and physical betrayal. Aiden wasn't just her lover. He was her partner in something far darker. Rachel admitted that she had used her position at her firm to steer lucrative contracts his way. In return, he had showered her with gifts, trips, and promises of a future together. The financial details were staggering. Aiden had convinced Rachel to create hidden accounts, moving money through shell companies tied to fraudulent deals. She described feeling addicted to the secrecy, the thrill, the illusion of control. But as Aiden's grip on her life tightened, Rachel's autonomy faded. Each word she spoke felt like watching a building collapse in slow motion. The person I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone who had made decisions I couldn't fathom. Yet, amidst the anger and heartbreak, I couldn't ignore the anguish in her eyes. She wasn't proud of what she had done. If anything, she seemed hollowed out by it. Rachel's confession might have been the end, but then she revealed something that reframed everything. She had tried to end things with Aiden weeks ago. Their relationship had soured, his promises growing empty, and his demands more aggressive. When she told him she wanted out, Aiden had shown his true colors. He threatened to expose her, claiming to have evidence that would ruin her career and reputation. He knew about the money, the manipulated contracts, and the hidden accounts. If she walked away, he said, he would destroy her. This revelation changed the dynamic. Rachel wasn't just a cheater. She was ensnared in a web of her own making, trapped by a man who had exploited her vulnerabilities. My anger didn't fade, but it became entangled with a reluctant sense of responsibility. As much as I despised what she had done, I couldn't ignore the danger she was in. Faced with the full scope of the situation, I knew we needed help. I called Liam, whose expertise in uncovering digital trails had already proven invaluable. When I explained the new developments, he didn't hesitate. His calm pragmatism was a lifeline in the chaos. Over the next few days, Liam helped us comb through Rachel's correspondence with Aiden, financial records, and contracts. The picture that emerged was both damning and shocking. Aiden wasn't just manipulating Rachel. He was a con artist operating on a much larger scale. The contracts Rachel had funneled his way were part of a broader pattern of fraud, one that extended beyond her firm. Aiden had used similar tactics with other women, leveraging their positions to enrich himself while leaving them to shoulder the consequences. Armed with this knowledge, we devised a plan. Rachel would reach out to Aiden, pretending to reconcile. She would arrange a meeting under the guise of discussing how they could move forward. Meanwhile, Liam and I prepared to document everything, setting up recording devices and consulting a legal advisor to ensure the evidence would hold up in court. The meeting took place in a conference room Rachel had reserved under an alias. Liam and I waited in an adjacent room, monitoring the conversation through the devices we had planted. Rachel played her part perfectly, luring Aiden into a false sense of security. He spoke freely, his arrogance blinding him to the trap. He bragged about his exploits, detailing the contracts he had manipulated and the profits he had amassed. When Rachel mentioned his threats, Aiden's tone shifted. He became defensive, then angry, his words confirming everything we suspected. The evidence we gathered was enough to dismantle Aiden's schemes. We turned it over to law enforcement, setting off a chain reaction that brought his fraudulent empire crashing down. As the investigation unfolded, former victims came forward, their testimonies adding to the case against him. Rachel's cooperation earned her some leniency, though she wasn't absolved entirely. She faced legal consequences for her role in Aiden's schemes, but the weight of her remorse and her willingness to make amends gave her a chance to rebuild. For me, the fallout was both liberating and devastating. The truth had been laid bare, but it came at the cost of everything we had built together. Rachel and I had confronted the storm together, but the damage it left behind was irreparable. After Aiden's arrest and the collapse of his schemes, life didn't return to the normal I had once envisioned. Instead, it became an exhausting balancing act, rebuilding the shattered pieces while navigating the wreckage left in his wake. Rachel and I remained tethered by shared experiences, but those bonds felt as fragile as spider silk, strained by memories of betrayal that lingered like unhealed wounds. Rachel's decision to cooperate with the authorities had earned her leniency, but it came at a steep cost. She was required to testify in court against Aiden, revisiting their relationship and the manipulations that had ensnared her. Each session on the stand stripped away another layer of her once unshakable confidence. I watched helplessly as she became a shadow of the woman I had married, her laughter and vitality replaced by quiet exhaustion. For me, the process was equally grueling. Her testimony, though vital, was a constant reminder of the choices she had made and the damage they had caused. I wanted to forgive her. I truly did, but every time I looked at her, I saw Aiden's shadow looming between us. Forgiveness felt like chasing a horizon that always receded, no matter how hard I ran. We turned to counseling, hoping a professional could help untangle the mess we had made of our marriage. The sessions were raw and brutally honest. Rachel confessed to feeling unseen and unappreciated, the loneliness that had driven her into Aiden's arms. I admitted my own failures, the complacency, the ways I had missed the signs until it was too late. Progress was painstakingly slow, but amidst the rubble, faint glimmers of hope began to appear. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep trying. In her attempt to make amends, Rachel began volunteering with an organization that supported victims of financial fraud. Through her work, she met Emily, another of Aiden's victims. Emily's story mirrored Rachel's in unsettling ways, a whirlwind romance that spiraled into manipulation and betrayal. Their shared experiences forged a bond between them, one that seemed to lighten Rachel's emotional burden. Emily became a regular presence in our lives, her warm and optimistic demeanor offering a much-needed counterbalance to the tension that often hung over our home. She had a knack for finding humor in even the darkest moments, her laughter cutting through the heaviness like a breath of fresh air. For the first time in months, I saw Rachel smile, a genuine, unguarded smile that reminded me of the woman I had fallen in love with. Just as we began to rebuild, a stark reminder of the past shattered our fragile peace. One evening, while Rachel and I were sitting on the couch, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You think it's over, but it's not." Rachel's face went pale as she handed me the phone, her hands trembling. The message was unsigned, but its implication was unmistakable. Someone connected to Aiden or his network was still out there, and they were watching us. I reached out to Liam, who had been my rock during the initial investigation. Using his expertise, he traced the number to a burner phone registered in a nearby city. Beyond that, the trail went cold. It was a dead end, but it was enough to leave us on edge, the threat of the unknown casting a long shadow over our lives. A week later, the situation escalated. Rachel and I returned home from dinner to find the front door ajar, the lock splintered. Inside, the house was in chaos. Drawers pulled open, papers scattered, and cabinets emptied. Though nothing of significant value seemed to be missing, the message was clear. This wasn't a random burglary. Someone had been searching for something, and the deliberate nature of the intrusion left us rattled. The police conducted their investigation, but their conclusions were predictable. Likely a crime of opportunity. Rachel and I knew better. The break-in was no coincidence, and the uncertainty of its purpose kept us awake at night. We installed security cameras, reinforced the locks, and started double-checking every window before bed. But no amount of precaution could restore the sense of safety we had once taken for granted. The tension weighed heavily on both of us, threatening to undo the fragile progress we had made. Emily's presence during this turmoil became a source of strength for both Rachel and me. She refused to let fear dictate our lives, encouraging us to confront the threat head-on. One evening, as she and I discussed the break-in while Rachel attended a late counseling session, Emily shared something that caught me off guard. She had been digging into Aiden's network, determined to understand how he had ensnared so many victims. In her search, she uncovered a chilling revelation. Aiden hadn't acted alone. He had a partner, someone who had orchestrated much of his financial schemes and stayed hidden in the shadows. Emily's findings pointed to a figure deeply embedded in the financial world, someone who had benefited significantly from Aiden's manipulations. The partner's identity was still unknown, but their involvement suggested that the danger we faced wasn't just a ghost from the past. It was an active threat. With this new information, I contacted Liam once more. Together, we decided to expand our investigation. Emily joined our efforts, her determination driving her to uncover the truth not just for herself, but for all of Aiden's victims. Rachel, though hesitant at first, eventually agreed to help. She understood that only by facing this new danger could she truly put her past behind her. Piece by piece, the puzzle began to take shape. Financial records, encrypted emails, and anonymous tips painted a picture of a sprawling operation. Aiden's schemes were part of a larger network, one that extended into legitimate businesses, political circles, and even law enforcement. The deeper we delved, the clearer it became that Aiden's partner wasn't merely a silent benefactor. This person was the mastermind, a shadowy figure who had not only orchestrated Aiden's rise, but was now working to protect their empire at all costs. As we unraveled the web, the sense of danger grew. This wasn't just about exposing corruption or seeking justice. It was about survival. Whoever Aiden's partner was, they had resources, connections, and a clear motive to eliminate anyone who threatened their operation. Our fragile lives, already fractured by betrayal, now faced a new and far more dangerous adversary. As we unraveled the threads of Aiden's network and sought the identity of his enigmatic partner, the scale of what we were uncovering grew staggering. Hidden accounts, financial corruption, and connections to powerful figures painted a chilling picture of a conspiracy far more extensive than we'd imagined. Each revelation raised more questions, and the closer we got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. Liam and Emily's research eventually led to a breakthrough. Encrypted emails and suspicious transactions pointed to a name, Alexander Grayson. Alexander was a towering figure in the financial world, a philanthropist with deep ties to politics and media. Publicly, he was a paragon of success and integrity. Privately, he was the architect of an empire built on fraud, manipulation, and exploitation. Alexander hadn't just been Aiden's partner. He was the mastermind. It was clear that Aiden had been little more than a pawn in Alexander's sprawling operation. With connections that reached into law enforcement, the judiciary, and even the press, Alexander had ensured his empire remained untouchable. Taking him down wouldn't just be difficult. It would be perilous. The threats against Rachel and the break-in at our home were no longer mysteries. Alexander was behind them, his attempts to intimidate us clear signs that we were on the right track. With time running out, we decided on a bold course of action, luring Alexander into a trap. Rachel, reluctant but resolute, agreed to be the bait. She reached out through a carefully crafted intermediary, claiming she wanted to reestablish ties and prove her loyalty. The idea of Rachel returning to the orbit of a man as dangerous as Alexander filled me with dread. But she insisted it was the only way to gather the evidence we needed. Liam and Emily set the stage for the meeting. Hidden cameras, recording devices, and backup plans were meticulously arranged. The location was an exclusive private club, public enough to ensure some level of safety but discreet enough for Alexander to feel comfortable. On the night of the meeting, Rachel was composed and focused, her nerves buried beneath a veneer of calm. I watched her leave, my stomach in knots as I envisioned every possible outcome. Alexander arrived at the club with a calm authority that made my skin crawl. He greeted Rachel with a practiced charm that barely concealed his predatory nature. Their conversation began innocuously, but Rachel skillfully guided it toward the contracts and accounts that had tied her to Aiden's schemes. Alexander's mask slipped as he leaned in, speaking in more candid terms. He reassured Rachel that her role in the fallout was a temporary setback and outlined his plans for expanding his operations. It was clear he viewed her as a tool, a means to an end, and he wasn't shy about leveraging her vulnerabilities to draw her back in. Every word was recorded, every veiled threat and boastful admission captured. When Rachel finally broached the subject of the threats and break-in, Alexander's arrogance betrayed him. He acknowledged them without hesitation, cementing the case against him. The evidence from the meeting was damning. Working with a trusted journalist, we leaked the recordings to the media. The public outrage was immediate, and law enforcement agencies were forced to act swiftly. Alexander's arrest sent shockwaves through the financial world. His empire crumbled as associates turned on him to save themselves. The carefully curated image of the philanthropist and businessman was stripped away, replaced by the portrait of a calculating criminal mastermind. As satisfying as his downfall was, the aftermath revealed a final, devastating twist. While sifting through the remaining evidence, Liam uncovered something deeply unsettling. A series of transactions that linked Alexander's network to Emily. At first, the connection seemed implausible. Emily had been our ally, a victim who had shared in our struggles. But as Liam dug deeper, the truth became undeniable. Emily wasn't just another victim. She was one of Alexander's trusted operatives, planted to monitor our progress and steer us away from uncovering the full scope of his empire. The revelation hit like a sledgehammer. Emily, who had become a friend and confidant, had been manipulating us from the start. Her betrayal was the ultimate twist, a reminder that even those closest to us could hide the darkest secrets. When confronted, Emily didn't deny it. She revealed that her loyalty to Alexander had been forged years earlier, her complicity in his schemes rewarded with wealth and influence. Her role had been to contain threats, discredit whistleblowers, and, if necessary, eliminate obstacles. Emily was arrested and charged alongside Alexander, her confession sealing her fate. The takedown of Alexander's empire was a victory, but it came at a heavy cost. Rachel and I had faced betrayal, danger, and heartbreak together, but the scars left by the ordeal ran deep. Our marriage had survived the storm, but it was forever changed. The trust between us was fragile, rebuilt piece by piece, and our shared pain became both a burden and a bond. Months later, as we stood on the deck of a small cabin overlooking a tranquil lake, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The pain, the betrayal, and the danger had shaped us in ways we never expected. But they had also taught us resilience, the power of honesty, and the strength that comes from confronting the truth, no matter how difficult it may be. Rachel took my hand, her grip steady. We didn't speak, letting the sounds of the water and wind fill the silence. The past would always be a part of us, but it no longer defined us. We had survived the storm, and now we were ready to rebuild.